My name is Niall Richard Murphy. I am the instigator and co-author of 2 books on SRE, and I'm Global Head of Azure SRE.
Hi, I'm Amy Harms, and I'm Head of SRE for SharePoint.
I'm Stephen Fitzmaurice, and I'm an engineering lead in Microsoft News.
Hi, I'm James Walsh. I work as an SRE for SharePoint Online.
From my point of view, I can think of no more important job in the industry at this time. I think the set of problems and the intellectual challenge that you have when you're working with systems in production, as opposed to how they're theoretically supposed to work. Working in production itself is such a complicated thing today and involves so much of special thinking as opposed to feature development. The art of figuring out the right thing to do with a sufficiently complicated system is, I don't think there's a comparable challenge in the industry.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think lots of times when people talk about, well, maybe it's not that complex, and what I find is that a lot of the most senior people that I've ever worked with end up coming from sort of application development, where they've worked on several different applications, and they're maybe 4th or 5th application success under their belt, and they start to kind of think, right, I've mastered that particular skill set, that experience. I know how to design and deliver an application. And now what's actually interesting is sort of the gaps between applications as they run in a sufficiently complex system. And so for me, oftentimes it's the most senior people who actually end up gravitating towards an SRE role because they're looking for the larger problems, the problems at scale, the problems that aren't well documented yet, that people don't understand yet. So I find that's really interesting.
Yeah, certainly, we definitely find a lot of problems, interesting problems. But for me, when it comes to talk about interesting, to be able to investigate these problems and these complex systems, you have to be able to have an understanding of all the components that make up the system. So that's what I find really interesting, in that it's not just heavily focused on one area. You have to understand the different stacks, so that it's almost like a jigsaw where you piece together the different parts of the puzzle. And you're able to find out then what exactly is going on. It's a lot of that variety, and I know a bit of a cliche, but literally you do learn something new every day, because if you don't learn something new every day, you are starting to fall behind, and that next difficult problem that you face, you're going to be missing some crucial piece that's going to help you fix it. So
yeah, and it's very exciting because technology is always moving on, so your skills are always growing and changing and adapting. And also, I don't know, it's also a cliche, I kind of say it's more like archaeology in the digital space. So there's, especially at the scale that's running in Microsoft, you can find a lot of problems from something that might run on your box or in a few boxes, but when it's running and there's millions of users using it, there's always interesting problems that you can find. And again, with senior, it's your experience grows, and you can find all these interesting problems that are challenging and changing and adapting, and I don't know, it's quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, just to respond to a few things said there, I used to say in a previous life that one of the jobs of SRE was to look after the entire life cycle of software objects, so from design to decommissioning, and not only the job being to birth a piece of software successfully and usher it out into the world and look after it during the world, but also occasionally to bury it at the crossroads with a stake through its heart when that was appropriate.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to say, I noticed the language of the panel talking a lot about problems and kind of locating in conceptual space the domain of SRE within kind of troubleshooting and kind of post hoc reaction to stuff. But in fact, actually, it's not that in its entirety either. There are significant creative components to it as well. And those creative components can express themselves at the design stage of an application or system you're working with. but also in the creation stage of tools and infrastructure required to make things work better.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in the world that we're kind of coming out of, right, the pre-cloud world, shall we say, you know, ops and, you know, delivering a service was very divorced from creating, you know, on-premise packaged software. And what we see now, right, post-cloud is actually those two things have been completely conflated in a rather sometimes violent kind of way. So now you have, you know, one group of people who used to only solve half of the problem, now they're solving both halves of the problem. And there's this natural tension between shipping features as quickly as possible to make customers, you know, to keep customers delighted, and running that service and learning from it. And what I find really interesting about, you know, working in SRE as opposed to working in ops or just working in operating a software is you now are part of that creative balance with engineers who are writing features, and you have this opportunity rather than it being tension, right? It's what they call creative friction, you know, where the best ideas are actually coming out of the interaction between these two groups of people, which in the past had really radically opposed incentives and motivations and reasons why they were doing it. And now with an SRE model, you have this great opportunity where actually, you know, it's a self-managing, you know, kind of like auto-healing kind of culture of getting the best things into production, but keeping the best things in production for as long as possible. That's what I find really exciting about it.
Yeah, and like a minor thing just to add on top is, I feel as an SRE, your skills are growing all the time, so you're learning, you're getting experience, so you can actually take that role as a consultant to go back to guys who are building the products and delivering these to actually bring key insights into how they can evolve their architecture and build better stuff. So like you're coming back with this global like scale problems, finding out the root causes, figuring them out, and you're actually bringing back value to the rest of the business by sharing with them how small code tweaks can make a big impact.
Yeah.
So it's a consultancy as I see it as well. It's two balanced on two ends, archaeology and consultancy.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. Like, I guess from the experience that we've got in the production side, we're now sort of evolving as a service in SharePoint, where the SREs are now much more embedded from the beginning of the development of features related to the product or the infrastructure, where we're actually sitting down with the developers, you know, at the very beginning and talking through everything, and we're able to add value where we're trying to put reliability into the service from that stage rather than being that reactive in that reactive situation after when it hits and lands, where things have to be retrospectively fixed. So I think that's, you know, another hugely interesting part of the job, and another, you know, huge way that SRE brings value to the entire product.
I don't think that many people realize, or well, I certainly didn't before I joined, but there's probably some population that doesn't realize that Microsoft has been in the business of running kind of billion user style services for well over a decade.
Yeah.
And obviously SRE in the industry, we talk a lot about scale. We're located mostly in places to do with scale in some sense. Now I'm on record as saying that that's not absolutely necessary in order to have a SRE role, and so I feel I should be consistent with the thing that I previously said, so that's fine. But here we have particular challenges which look larger than other challenges, and we have the complexity of having to serve both a constituency which is born in the cloud and online and all the rest of that, and also a constituency which is less so. And I find the intellectual mix of those challenges to be pretty interesting.
Just in terms of, you know, how interesting, you know, maybe I'm just thinking I've talked in such high, you know, arching, you know, kind of ideological boundaries, but, you know, an interesting anecdote about how interesting SRE can really be is something that actually happened last Friday. So last week was Fix Hack Learn Week, and in SharePoint we had a session on Friday where various people from around the group were giving a small kind of presentation about how they do some root cause analysis work. And one of the folks who works with us, Brian, came in and demoed just a little tiny tool that he and his team have written to make their specific SRE life better. And what was great about it was they had all of these kind of like back-end, kind of hardcore feature crews in that room who, all of a sudden were like, oh wow, you're one of us. You've written an amazing tool piece of software. Can we have it? How quickly can we have it? And can you make it do this? And like basically issuing feature requests right there in the room. And it was really exciting actually for us to see, that, there is this, even inside Microsoft, this growing sense of, oh, this is what SRE can be, and this is how we can work together. And you guys also write software and automate things and do really cool stuff, and we want to be a part of that. So it was a lot of fun.
That you're in my tribe moment is
Yeah.
particularly good when that happens.
I definitely enjoyed it. It was one of my favorite moments to date.
It's long been said that Microsoft runs on trust, and I think certainly when I joined the company, I came to understand the value of relationship building very much more than I had previously. And ultimately, of course, that any relationship between two groups has to rely on trust. And so one of the ways this sometimes reflects itself in the SRE domain is that you are building trust with the partners, maybe not just a product development team, but other partners. Building trust by repeating good activities in public and sharing and collaborating, so that you can build a history of, okay, like they are acting in our interest, they're acting in the interest of the company as a whole, and so on. And I think that's an important point that can sometimes be lost in slightly more transactional approaches to relationships between groups.
And maybe to add to that, it's for me personally, Microsoft as a whole has really embraced trust and made a big shift, especially in the last years, to move to more of an open source model. Without going off point too much, what I mean by that is you're not limited or bound in your area of how you collaborate with other people. And part of that means is you're always innovating and hacking together, and that actually builds a trust in the team, but it also is bringing trustful products. Like for example, I'm in Microsoft News, our organizational goal is to deliver trusted news to the world. So we have to have trust and security and privacy and everything built in from the ground up. So that's obviously the brand of the content we show is trustful. So we have a big onus on collaborating really closely with the teams that's running our systems as well as ourselves to keep that trust in from the bottom up. So for me, trust is key, and it's quite exciting and invigorating in the industry to see that Microsoft holds that as a first-class citizen. So we have a lot of it. Without getting lost, it's more like it's part of the culture and the DNA day to day. So for me, trust is super important.
Yeah, it's been a huge theme for us in our service lately, especially where we're always working to drive reliability into the product from the very beginning. We've actually been involved in quite a few exercises where we're trying to actually re-establish trust with customers as well, where they haven't maybe got the right reliability that they were expecting. So SRE has been one of the key teams involved in the engagements there, to figure out, what is the reliability issue that's affecting this customer? Because our customers' their key business operation and processes rely on our product. So, they need that 4 nines availability, trust in us. So through our investigations, our improvements to the service, the fixes that we've been able to drive back into the product, gaps that we've been able to cover, in terms of monitoring and telemetry and all that. We've been actually in these cases able to win back the trust of some of these, especially larger enterprise customers, which may have gone quite quite fragile at one point. And that's been, you know, a really good eye opener for me in terms of the importance of trust, and, you know, when it's threatened, and how SRE can be so pivotal in actually re-establishing it.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it at the moment is that SRE is the premier customer advocate at point of use of the software for massively online systems, right? Mm-hmm. So in many ways our job is to be the advocate for the customer, in the sense that if they can't use the software, like, it doesn't really matter what features it has.
Well, that is a feature, right?
Yeah, indeed, absolutely. But to be the customer advocate, and to be to have the customer experience in mind, informed by the direct data and experience in production of what's happening, just means that our organizational placement is really good for enabling that kind of thinking. Yeah. And I know there's loads of customer advocates all over the place in various different bits of the org, but there's nothing quite like being directly connected to reality for that to have a certain force.
I think there's real opportunities for Microsoft as a business in that space. You know, one of the things that, like James was referring to, you know, the work that we're able to kind of dive into and help, you know, specific customers. And one of the things I find interesting about working in SharePoint is, obviously, you know, we can have a single customer who, because of their user base and the size of them as an enterprise, you know, just that one customer for us is larger than what some successful software companies have as their entire business. So, you know, there is this real issue of the scale of the opportunity or the size of the problem. But one of the things I think that's Microsoft is maybe, you know, innovating in terms of how we're empowering, you know, people and organizations to do more, is we're changing how a customer interacts with their software provider, the company that delivers that to them. So we, you know, like our SRE team, for example, is very integrated with the folks who do the customer success work, not only in terms of our, you know, our day-to-day stuff, just making sure that, you know, things go out the door in a reliable way, but also when things, you know, have been less reliable and it comes back in the door, you know, the customers are a really important part of the feedback loop, and we've gotten very mature and very, you know, high scale at taking that. But we're also now at this point, we're actually able to work with, you know, other parts of Microsoft like sales and customer support, where we're actually changing how customers buy the software, and we're changing the feature set that they look for when they go to purchase the software, which I find fascinating. You know, like we have a product called Engineering Direct, and it's available, you know, to customers at scale, because it's a costly thing for us to deliver, but basically we're giving those customers at that scale who are having real kind of technical engineering problems direct feedback loop to our SRE team, to our engineers. I think that's really interesting. I think for a long time in enterprise software, especially less so than, you know, consumer software, customers might have wanted that direct engagement with the engineering team, but it was very ad hoc, it was very individual, it was very much dependent on the relationship between them as a strategic customer and their software company. But we're now at the point where we're actually able to offer this as a service to people. They can just choose if they want it, and they can just have it. So I think it's a real innovation in terms of the way that we're delivering and shipping software and working with customers, which I find exciting.
Ultimately, it ends up improving the product all up anyway, because when you're talking about customers of that size, they're inevitably going to find things in the product, you know, at the scale they're using it, or at the different ways that they are using it that haven't been seen before. And because of that loop that's there, you know, through the customer support and SRE and product teams, we're able to identify that now, and we're able to fix that. So now we have a better product.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good way of visualizing it for me anyway. We talked about box product as service. There used to be this big, huge wall between the customers and the enterprise. So like for me, a good way of conceptualizing that is that it's smashed down now. So from obviously implicit signals or explicit signals you can get from users using your product now, you can actually react quite quickly. But I also, on a different tangent, I also feel that it's an element of practicing what you preach from the ground up. So Microsoft, again, over the last few years has made a big change where if there's no trust within your team or in your organization, and especially not in your stack, you can't sell trust to the customer. So what we're seeing today, like a real life example, is in Microsoft News, because we have practiced what we preach for a long time, there's actually customers coming to Microsoft now and saying, where's this news? We want this news, because they know it's trusted, it's validated, it has a human touch. There's editors around the world. All this big scale is like now trusted, and it's making value for the business. So you feel very excited in that. And well, my own personal opinion is none of that's possible whatsoever if you don't have this collaboration and trust built in from the beginning.